Hello, everyone, and happy Valentine's Day. Today marks an exciting milestone for all of us here as we kick off our 5th year of virtual media briefings. I'm Philip Sanfield, the Port of LA's Communications Director, and with me, as he's been from the very start, is Executive Director Gene Seroka. Greetings, Gene.
Hello, Philip, and thank you all for joining us. I'd like to express my appreciation to those of you who have been participating in these briefings over the past 4 years. Today's guest is a trailblazer. California Lieutenant Governor Eleni Kounalakis is here with us. Welcome to the Port of Los Angeles, Lieutenant Governor. It's so great to have you in studio.
Well, thank you, Gene. It's great to be here.
In a moment, the Lieutenant Governor will share her thoughts on infrastructure investment, sustainability, competitiveness, and so much more. Then, as always, we'll open the floor for your questions. So let's kick it off with a first look at the 2024 numbers. The Port of Los Angeles is off to a great start, with January volume reaching an impressive 855,000 20-foot equivalent units. This marks our second best January on record, surpassed only by the pandemic-induced surge back in 2022. It's also our 6th consecutive month of year-over-year increases, with January of 2024 finishing 18% higher than the previous year. Two primary factors are driving these numbers. First, cargo owners have been actively replenishing inventories and swiftly moving goods ahead of the Lunar New Year holiday. As many of you know, the Year of the Dragon officially began last Saturday, resulting in the planned closure of many factories in Asia for about 10 days as workers take off time to celebrate with their families. Second, generally positive economic data demonstrates the strength of the American economy. For example, 2023 holiday sales grew by 3.8% year over year, hitting an all-time record high of $964 billion in sales. And powered by increased consumer spending, our nation's GDP grew by a strong 3.3% in the fourth quarter, surpassing Wall Street's expectation of a 2% gain. With exceptional job growth in January, 353,000 new jobs added, retailers and manufacturers are gearing up for more spending by Americans. Now, breaking down the January volume, imports came in at about 442,000 container units, a significant 19% increase over last year. And this time of year, we see a pickup in cargo ahead of the Lunar New Year holiday traditionally. Addition to that, several of you have asked if imports are rising as a result of the situations in the Red Sea and Panama Canal. I'll talk more about that during today's Q&A, but in short, the impact has been limited, at least so far. That could change as shippers weigh a host of factors in those regions. But the bottom line is this: LA has the capacity to handle additional cargo if there's a need or desire to reroute in this direction. We stand ready to help American importers and exporters to keep our economy going. Moving over to exports, we processed more than 126,000 TEUs in January, which is a 23% increase over last year. That marks the 8th consecutive month of year-on-year export growth, a welcome rebound after more than 2 years of very low export volume. And empty containers finished at 287,000 TEUs in January. That's up 14% compared to last year. Looking ahead, our Port Optimizer data indicates more robust volume in February. I'm estimating in excess of 700,000 TEUs for the month. Then, cargo will likely ease during the last week of February and into the first part of March as we feel the impact from the planned holiday closures. All told, we expect Q1 to tell a different story than last year. That's when some of our cargo shifted to the East and Gulf Coast ports due to concerns about protracted labor negotiations. So, for the quarter, I expect a 20% increase to about 2.2 million TEUs over Q1 last year. Today, with a 6-year labor deal in place between our dock workers, the ILWU, and the Pacific Maritime Association on the West Coast, confidence in our gateway's ability to deliver is strong. In fact, since the labor deal was ratified last August, our Asia import market share is up to 46%. That's a 4 percentage point jump for the San Pedro Bay ports during that time. There's more work to do on this front, but so far I'm very pleased with the direction we're heading this year.
Thank you, Gene. Now let's turn our attention to the Lieutenant Governor.
My pleasure, Philip. In 2018, Eleni Kounalakis made history by becoming California's first elected female lieutenant governor. Following her election, Governor Gavin Newsom appointed her to be the representative for international affairs and trade, amplifying her role in California's government. Prior to these duties, Lieutenant Governor Kounalakis served as President Obama's ambassador to the Republic of Hungary from 2010 to 2013. And if that wasn't enough, she also served as a member of the San Francisco Port Commission. And before all of her public service, the Lieutenant Governor was a highly accomplished businesswoman specializing in housing development in the Sacramento area. Lieutenant Governor, with your background, I know this is going to be a great conversation for our audience today. Thanks so much for joining.
Well, Gene, let me just say I'm so excited to be here. I think there's just this natural energy surrounding the Port of LA and the whole San Pedro complex. You see it with your staff. There's always something happening here. It's very much a center in the state and in the country for international trade and activity, and really it's just a thrill to be here.
That's great. So let's start off with the state strategy around international trade and our 11 ports here in California. How is that going so far? And I know it's underscored with your involvement.
Well, we've been working together now for about 5 years, and I was very proud when I first became lieutenant governor, the very first elected position that I've had, that I was able to use my international experience to be able to shine a light on the importance of our ports. So a lot has happened since then, and if we're thinking really about the major trends that impact California ports, there are a couple things that I would point to. I think first and foremost, the last 3 years, this federal government has implemented some pretty significant programs to invest in our infrastructure and prepare to transition to a carbon-free energy future. So the Inflation Reduction Act, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, and the CHIPS Act has been described as a $3 trillion wall of money that can be directed into, in particular, a state like California, into better development into our infrastructure. And so I think that is a trend that is going to result and has already resulted in a lot of really exciting programs that Californians, and in particular, the private sector, is able to leverage into some really exciting progress and projects. The second thing I would point to is the fact that over the last 2 years before this year, we had state budget surpluses. And what we saw out of that was a real prioritization of building the infrastructure at our ports. In fact, and you know very well because you're a recipient of part of these funds, about $2 billion in state funding towards some very important and pivotal infrastructure projects here. We were talking about the way that you're utilizing that program. And then I would say that maybe the third biggest trend that is going to impact trade, investment, and ports here is really the fact that we are getting closer and closer to those 2045 goals of being carbon neutral and having a carbon-free electric grid. So I think all of these things are coming together with really a point on the role that our ports are going to play and the way that ports are going to be impacted. But maybe before I just say, because you all talk about this every day, and in some ways I know we've moved beyond COVID, but the public in the state of California, maybe for the first time, had an awakening of the importance of supply chains and the importance in particular that our ports play. We talk about this number, 42% of all the containerized shipping that comes into the United States coming through California ports, but that became very much a day-to-day issue for Californians trying to figure out where the important PPE to protect our frontline workers, to the ability to bring in the kinds of goods to when you're stuck at home, build your deck and your backyard. You know, all of these things came into focus. And I just want to commend you and all of your team here for stepping up, for dealing with these these unusual swings and issues that you had to contend with here in a way that was both really heroic, I would say, from your port workers all the way up, Jean, to your leadership, but also the fact that we get to move forward into the future with a greater awareness of the importance that our ports play.
I think you're exactly right. And there's not a stop I make in my travels and work here in Los Angeles where somebody doesn't come up and talk about the supply chain like it was their business, and it happens to be my neighbor or some at the line in the grocery store. So you're exactly right. The nation's and states' consciousness around supply chain is heightened. And that's why this generational investment that was spurred here in the state of California that led to federal legislation is really, really important to us. And it does give that private sector company the confidence to invest behind us. Just here in Los Angeles, we've been the recipient of more than $250 million in state funding over the last year, and additionally, another $110 million for the nation's first workforce training campus that we're going to use for the kid that sees this port every day that wants to join our industry to the longshore member who needs to be upskilled and reskilled. And it's with great thanks to you, Governor Newsom, Secretary of Transportation Oma and Director Dee Dee Myers from GOIZ, and our great state legislature that we're here now talking about all of this. It's just so great. Now, put on your other hat for just a moment. As California's representative for international affairs and trade, what are your top priorities in that role?
So there are a couple of things very specifically that we've been doing that I'd love to talk about, especially because you participated in these things. You know, just a few months ago, California welcomed the world during the Apec Summit. And it was about a year in planning. I was thrilled to be able to roll up my sleeves in my capacity to be able to make sure that the platform that we built for President Biden and the administration to welcome leaders from all of the APEC countries here, including Xi Jinping, that it was done at a level that our partners in Asia would really be able to see our state and our nation putting our best foot forward. I think it, frankly, was a resounding success. And I want to thank you because of the programming and the conference that you held to really be able to take advantage of these leaders and all of the, not just the heads of state, but their cabinet level officials who came in to be able to talk about California really as a gateway to Asia. That was very, very exciting. The other thing, as you know, every year we do a trade mission. Last year, we had a very successful trip to Japan with about 100 members of that delegation, which Director Myers and I co-led. We brought about 5 members of the governor's cabinet with us, signed MOUs. And again, the ports were there, and you all were able, among many other things, to sign an MOU with the Port of Tokyo on a green shipping corridor, which I know you've been very forward-leaning on as well. And then I think that another thing that I have really been working on very closely that I really would like to mention, because, again, it impacts you, is offshore wind. This is something that I'm very passionate about. When we look at the 2045 goals of carbon neutrality, we have got to do some very innovative things. So several years ago, I had the opportunity to co-sponsor the legislation to really get the ball rolling in offshore wind. This is a massive undertaking, but we have a goal of 5 gigawatts of floating offshore wind off of our coast by the end of the decade. And the construction of everything from the barges to the components themselves, to the process of bringing these components out to sea, to putting them in place, this is going to be central to not just the Port of LA, the Port of Long Beach, but also, you know, off of Morro Bay, off of Humboldt. It is a very bold goal. And I'm very focused on making sure that the state is doing everything we can to leverage our strength with the private sector to move this goal forward.
Yeah, that sets up the table so well, because as you know, being a former port commissioner up in San Francisco, along with Willie Adams, another friend of ours, who's the international president of the ILWU, you understand that these ports are so much more than just moving cargo. how much they mean to the community, to the workforce, and the investments that we're making to a greener future. Here in Los Angeles, we work on this every day, but we're also known to be in conversations about the cost of doing business in California, this complex labor landscape where we need to rise up and help our workforce, and the regulatory environment. And by the way, in addition to all that, we want to be the first zero-emission port complex in the world starting in 2030. How do we do all of that and excel in each of these areas as we climb this mountain towards that green future?
Well, we have a vision in the state of California, but what we know is that visions have to be operationalized. And it is much harder to operationalize a vision, in my opinion, than actually to have it. And it's complicated. And part of it is concrete steps and investments. And part of it is really, I think, people coming together and being committed to moving the actual goals forward. So I think that, to me, the most important part of it, Jean, and really I say this as someone who was in the private sector for 18 years, I sat across the table from government. And in my efforts in our family business that delivered housing projects in the Sacramento region, I will tell you, I didn't always feel that our expertise was honored or valued. I didn't always feel that when we had objections or challenges or raised issues that we were always heard. And so it is very important that government hears the voices of our stakeholders and relies on the expertise of the people who really have to help us operationalize these goals. So I think that's very important. And I think that you mentioned earlier the training center, $110 million of state funds that are going into this project. Your work with the ILWU and coming to the terms of the 6-year contract is a gold standard, and it also gives room over the next 6 years to focus on the work ahead and to recognize that training the next generation of the people who actually are on the front lines of doing this work is very important. So by listening to you, and by the way, I think that another priority was data sharing.
Yes.
And again, a $30 million investment by the state to be able to enhance data sharing between your port and 4 or 5 other ports to make sure that when it comes to supply chains, when it comes to goods movement, we're talking to one another. These are ideas that came from the ports and were recognized as priorities to help us get to our goals, and we've been able to do it together. So that's very important. But I also think that we need to recognize that it is a real issue that doing business in California because of our ambitious goals is challenging, and that we need to hear the private sector and find the ways where we can to have the kinds of efficiencies to make things work better. We also have to recognize that we put our money where our mouth is. And so because of those 2 years of budget surpluses, the governor has directed about $48 billion into the building the groundwork to getting to our ambitious climate goals. And that means building the charging stations that are going to be necessary to support all of the trucks that we now have these standards in place over the next few years to phase into zero emission transportation, and that partnership, I think, makes a difference as well. And I also want to recognize, because we've talked about the work of GOIZ, a lot of the government operational side is landing within GOIZ for the very first time, and there are so many programs there that are now being funded that the private sector can take advantage of.
You're exactly right. And for each of these challenges, we've also worked very closely on our responses. For example, on the cost side, it's more expensive to do business, buy a house, run your electricity here in California, But when we have peak volume of cargo, that unit cost becomes competitive with any place else on the world. With the labor landscape as challenging as it is, we start with a building block of a training center, but that encourages the private sector to come along with us. And just last week, I was in DC with some of our air regulators working in partnership to help that investment side of our green ambition for the future. So we're trying to answer each challenge every day, and it's the work we do with you that makes so much of this possible. So we really understand also that you have an important job as Lieutenant Governor. What's top of mind for you today outside the international trade realm that we just talked about that you're challenged with every day?
Well, I think that when we draw the lens back on California's challenges, we all know that income inequality is a real challenge in our state. We all know that we have a serious lack of housing, something that I am very familiar with, 18 years working to try to overcome the hurdles to deliver housing. And now really that problem has come home to roost. And it drives income inequality when the cost of housing is so high. We have other issues, you know well, homelessness and public health issues. I will say in my job as Lieutenant Governor, the area that I've been able to really focus a great deal of my time has been something that I'm very proud of, which is public higher education. So I'm the only person to sit on the boards of all three institutions of public higher education: the University of California, the CSU, and the community college system. We have about 2.6 million students enrolled across those systems, and about 38% are the first in their family to go to college. Now, I was thinking about it this morning. In some ways, the way that you move goods and containers in and out of your port, I think of our students and moving our students through these systems, through this incredible conveyor belt of talent, and moving them up into the system and out into the incredibly powerful economy that is California. And along the way, of course, these wonderful individuals are able to make a better life for themselves and for their family. So I get very excited about that. And what we know, and I really do want to give credit to Governor Newsom, is that training opportunities are absolutely critical. And so the training center here is part of that. I think 20,000 more jobs will be created in the future, and these trainees will be able to go into these jobs. But really beyond that, and when, you know, one of the things that I notice in government is we tend to say, this is what we're going to do, and here is the funding to do it. But money doesn't build things. People build things. And we absolutely have to focus on training the workforce of the future, but also recognize that these have to be good paying jobs. These have to be jobs where people are going to be able to support a family on, because that is ultimately the fundamental value of our state. So education, I get very excited about, and the component of that has to do with training for the future of the jobs of the future, that's what gets me most excited.
Fantastic. We share a lot of the same ideas as always. Great insight and great perspective. Philip, now for the fun part. Let's take some questions from the media.
Very good. Thanks, Gene. Before we get to the media, just one question from me. You've been on the road a lot lately. Can you tell us what you've been doing?
Yeah, that's right, Philip. I traveled to India, Vietnam, and Indonesia recently, and the goal was to bring more cargo back here to LA. Beginning with a stop in Mumbai, I attended the University of Southern California India Innovation Summit, led by University President Carol Folt. A highlight of that event was reconnecting with United States Ambassador to India and former Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti, who was the keynote speaker. Then it was on to New Delhi, where the ambassador also addressed a group of business people, followed by visits to Ho Chi Minh City and Jakarta for a series of supply chain symposiums hosted by APL Logistics and their chief operating officer in Asia, our friend Waldo Basilia. In all, I help lead discussions with more than 140 company representatives from the retail, industrial, and automotive sectors, along with select government officials. It's so important to actively engage with our global stakeholders and reinforce the value proposition the Port of Los Angeles has within the marketplace.
Thank you, Gene. So we've received some questions in advance, and time permitting, we'll also try to take some from the Q&A box below. If you've got a question, please include your name and affiliation. First question for Lieutenant Governor from Donna Littlejohn of the Southern California News Group. Looking at this year's state budget and cuts that could be coming, what will the impacts be on ports and infrastructure?
Well, that is a very important question, and I touched earlier on the strength of our investment in ports that came as a result of 2 consecutive years of budget surpluses. And there is no question that this year, having a budget deficit, things will be impacted. But what we also know is that over the last 2 years, there was really a prioritization on budget resiliency, on funding to the highest possible level, the rainy day fund, paying down bond obligations, and doing things so that recognizing that a deficit was likely this year, we would be ready to be able to bridge the gap. I think what we have to look at really is what may happen over the next few years, which goes back to our earlier conversation about making sure that we are investing in all the right places to continue to grow the California economy, now the 5th largest economy in the world, but still, in order to be able to continue to meet our budget goals, we have to have an eye to making sure that the California economy is strong into the future.
Thank you. Next question is for Gene. Several reporters, Bill Mongaluzzo, Journal of Commerce, Jeff Berman, Logistics Management, and several others have really asked the same question. It's about the impact of the Red Sea attacks and the drought in the Panama Canal, and on how it affects cargo coming to the West Coast and LA specifically. You touched on it briefly, noting the impact's been limited. Can you elaborate at all on that?
Yeah, thanks, Bill and Jeff. Always great to have you join us on this monthly press conference. Going back to my days living in the Middle East, when Somali interests were going after cargo ships and bulk tankers, we called on not only the United States government and its leadership around national security, but also our allied nations and NATO, which was headquartered in the African region in Djibouti. We met with on a regular basis, and to make sure the safety of crew, the cargo, and the assets continue to propel world trade. But from our perspective here, let's a little bit of context. About 30% of global container traffic moves through the Suez Canal. The majority of that goes to Europe, the Mediterranean, the continent, and the UK. That's their lifeline to the Asia manufacturing base. Much of this trade is being rerouted around the Cape of Good Hope, adding additional transit time, 2 to 3 weeks in duration, and about $1 million per vessel voyage. Not only that additional cost of time on the water, but think about the fuel burn in and of itself. Meanwhile, on this hemisphere side, the Panama Canal represents about 5% of global container traffic. And experts there, who are our friends running the Canal Authority, are doing everything they can to keep trade moving, including shuttling cargo by train from the Pacific side to the Atlantic for onward carriage here to the U.S. and Europe beyond. But recently, as I've traveled overseas, shippers are beginning to tell me that they're starting to reroute cargo over the west coast of the United States and avoid these hotspots, basically because of the uncertainty. It's not a deluge of freight, but we do see a little bit of an uptick because of these changes. And our Port Optimizer, that port community information sharing system, now gives us visibility about 40 days upstream before a cargo ship comes here to Los Angeles, so we can be prepared with our great skilled labor, land, and machinery to tackle any kind of increase in cargo that we'll be seeing. What I can tell you is that right now, we're running at about 75 to 80% of capacity here at the Port of LA. So for those companies who need assistance, we're here and we're ready.
Thank you, Gene. Next question is for the Lieutenant Governor from Ron White of the Los Angeles Times. Do you think that hydrogen as a fuel for trucks, locomotives, and even ships is the next big step in reducing emissions at the port?
Well, thank you for your question. And let me just say, Jean, that was such a comprehensive answer. And frankly, I think that recognizing the role of the United States in keeping our shipping corridors open is so incredibly important. And also recognizing what climate change is doing in Panama. These are things that really come into focus right here in Los Angeles and in California. So hydrogen is one of the very interesting areas where the United States and California are investing with the great hope that it will be one of the very important ways that we fuel the transportation industry, and particularly heavy-duty trucks and some of the equipment here at the port. I think that when we're looking at it, there's really a close eye to green hydrogen as the preferred way to create the hydrogen. And we're also looking at the ability for California to lead in that way. And that's why the selection of California as a hydrogen hub is very important and very exciting. It came with about $1.2 billion of investment from the federal government. There are, I think, 400 stakeholders that are coming together. There is a lot of work to do to make sure that we take the most advantage of this hydrogen hub in order to be able to make sure that hydrogen does play a leading role in the future of clean energy. What I would also say that when it comes to clean energy, it's going to have to be an all of the above approach. So it's one of the many things where there is tremendous investment going on. And I think that time will tell how broadly we're going to be able to utilize it. It did come up, by the way, quite frequently when we were in Japan. Japan is really very heavily invested in this technology. And because of the close relationship between California and Japan, they're a number one source of foreign direct investment, for instance. That is really largely how California has been so out in front on innovation. And I will also say that our universities play an important role. I believe I was at UC Riverside where I saw one of the very first hydrogen trucks. It's very cool. The waste product is water. It's really quite remarkable. So I think we have a lot to look forward to in innovation in hydrogen.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. The next question comes from James Allen at Random Lengths here in San Pedro. Exports out of the Port of LA only account for about 12% of overall cargo. What can the state do to increase exports out of California ports?
Is this for me?
Yes.
Oh, sure. Okay. So we can do a lot, and we do a lot. GOIZ, which we've been talking about, and the incredible leadership of Director Myers, they manage something called the STEP program, which gives kind of mini grants, not so many, but $10,000 to small businesses to help them come up with a plan and get the training and be able to enter into the export market. But that really brings us to the issue of small businesses. I think people are really surprised to hear that 90% of 90% of all businesses in California have fewer than 20 employees. And when it comes to exports, it's a lot of small business in agriculture in particular, and food products, but really across the board that are looking to play in this space. And the more that we can do to help support our small businesses and give the training that they need, the more likely they're going to be able to access those foreign markets. And I think that that's really where the action is, and something that excites me, again, as somebody who built a family business with my family. We didn't do exports, but certainly being in the Central Valley with so many family businesses, so many small businesses that pop up, people who want to access those markets, there is help, there is assistance, and the focus on that, I think, is going to be very important to increase our exports.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. The next question is for both Jean and the Lieutenant Governor. It comes from Stas Margaronis of the American Journal of Transportation. As China and Costco shipping near completion of the new megaport at Choncay, Peru, Should California and U.S. ports do more to encourage trade and shipping with South and Central America? Gene, perhaps you could set the table on this.
Sure, Philip. Hi, Stas. Thanks for joining again this month. You're exactly right. We want to do more business in Central and South America. The power of proximity is so strong. About 3% of our freight in the portfolio here at the Port of Los Angeles comes from the west coast of South America, seasonally, usually in the wintertime, on perishable commodities. Think fruits and vegetables, other agricultural products. The Trans-Pacific market continues to be our main source of imports and exports. But with continued investment and friendly trade relations, I see us really growing in this marketplace as well. Good insight, Stas. Thank you.
Well, I might just add, again, not as a deep water port, but as a land port. The border crossing between California and Mexico is one of the busiest land border crossings in the world. And you asked me earlier about some of the things that I've been focused on as the representative for international affairs and trade. Building the Otay Mesa East border crossing is a top priority for me and my work. I have been really very active in trying to elevate this as something that our federal government should be focused on. If you go to Otay Mesa, again, you cannot see the water from there, but what you will see is an 8-lane freeway that has been built right up to this pad, waiting for us to begin construction of this, the California side or the U.S. side of the border crossing. Mexico was way behind us. They are now ahead of us in completion of their side, and we're looking at trying to figure out ways to use at least the roadway infrastructure as an interim while we're waiting for the port for the actual facilities to be built. And when it is built, Otay Mesa East will be the cutting-edge technology in being able to reduce border crossing times, move goods and people over the border faster and more efficiently while still being able to monitor what is coming and going over the border. So I am very excited about this. I wish Washington were moving faster to support all of the leaders. It is an unusual circumstance. It's being led by leaders down in San Diego and Sandag with the support of the state government and my support in particular. We've been down to Mexico City many times. We're working on this. But I do think that when it comes to competitiveness for the state of California and looking at all of our trade infrastructure and all of our goods movement, Otay Mesa East is going to be a very important piece of the overall infrastructure.
Thank you. The next question is from Eric Watkins of Cargomatic for the Lieutenant Governor. You touched on this a little bit in your conversation with Gene. What are some of the key things being done at the state level to make sure that California ports remain competitive when it comes to cargo throughput?
We did. We talked quite a bit about this, but there was one other thing that I think is important to talk about because a lot of people have been focused on it, and that is the transition into the clean fleets. And I hope it's a little off topic, but I think that frankly it's quite central to competitiveness because. And I'll use as an analogy the decision in the executive order 2 years ago when Gavin Newsom issued the executive order that all new cars in the state of California, starting in 2035, need to be ZEVs, zero-emission vehicles. It made headlines around the world. And what we have seen, as California is the largest consumer market anywhere in the country, is that there are car companies that have been working very hard to meet the market. Companies like Tesla that could not have happened anywhere were it not for California's aggressive policies, but car companies around the world are moving to meet the California market. So we are now kind of at the beginning stages of doing something similar when it comes to trucks. And there's a lot of conversation about this. We are really working to make sure that this doesn't impact small businesses, that we really are looking at the major companies to help us transition. It is a transition. It doesn't happen all at once, but this is something that I think is going to be very important to focus on, to make sure that we get it right in order to be able to ensure that as we transition to a carbon-free energy future, to this magnificent goal of the Port of LA of being the first 100% clean port, zero-emission port in the world, that we are focused on making sure that we can bring everybody along with us so we don't lose competitiveness.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. We have time for one more question, and Jean, I'm going to bring a few questions together for on this last one. What is your take on cargo trade for throughout the year in terms of an outlook, forecast, and what are the key issues that are playing in? What are the key factors?
Yeah, thanks, Philip. I think 2024 will see a better year for cargo flow here at the Port of Los Angeles than we saw in 2023. We're a little more normalized based on inventory levels across the country for retailers and manufacturers alike, and the American consumer continues to buy, even in the face of a downturn in inflation and higher interest rates. But three big things that we're watching, in addition to those geopolitical and climate-related issues that we spoke of earlier. One, it's an election year. Folks are going to try to position and try to interpret policy. Some will get distracted during this time, but we've got to keep our eye on the ball. Second, new build capacity in the container shipping industry is starting to see those cargo ships come online now. Some are being ingested into that Middle East and Suez Canal trade to augment those longer transit times and deeper cuts from a cost perspective. And then lastly, there's another labor contract coming up for negotiation this year on the East and Gulf Coast of the United States. Some folks in our industry are watching that very closely, and if history proves itself correct, there'll be a little bit of a shift of cargo back west once again as those negotiations go on. But please remember, the International Longshore Association has not gone on strike since the mid-1970s. They too want to get a contract done while paying their members what they're worth and how much they've done for this nation over the past several years. So a lot to take in and a lot more to focus on, but realistically speaking, I think from our perspective, we've got our eye on those important issues, and we're going to try to manage to deliver that best-in-class service that we have here at the Port of LA.
Lieutenant Governor, Jean, thank you both. Back to you, Jean, for some final thoughts.
Oh, thanks, Philip. And Lieutenant Governor, this has been a treat to have you here at the port office. I know you've got to run to get to another important meeting of the UC Regents, but thank you for taking the time to fly down this morning just to be here with our friends in the media.
Well, it's really, really a thrill. Thank you for all you do. Your team here is just top notch, and it's a great privilege for me and for members of my team to be down here with you today.
Thank you again. Today, I'd like to conclude by sharing a few thoughts about our incredible Los Angeles community. First, on February 3rd, we celebrated the grand opening of the Wilmington Waterfront Promenade. Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass and other elected officials were among our esteemed guests. We were also joined by our Los Angeles Harbor Commissioners, both past and present, along with hundreds of residents who all came together for this long-awaited occasion. Later that afternoon, this beautiful new venue played host to our 10th annual Lunar New Year Festival, drawing visitors from every corner of the LA region. The cultural celebrations were capped off by an unforgettable fireworks display. This $77 million port investment spans 9 acres and is a stunning window on the waterfront. The new promenade features an array of amenities, including a picnic pier, boat dock, pedestrian and bike trails, expansive open spaces, and unprecedented waterfront access. The promenade opening was an extraordinary occasion that has set the stage for even greater development and progress in the years to come. We take this responsibility to community investment seriously because we're committed to improving lives. Second, I want to take a moment to acknowledge that February is Black History Month. Here in the city of Los Angeles, this month marks a special time to celebrate the indelible impact Black culture has had on our beloved city, our nation, and the world. The Los Angeles Department of Cultural Affairs has curated a host of unique events and exhibits taking place all across our city. From film festivals to art exhibits to performances and community gatherings, Black History Month in LA is a vibrant celebration of the rich heritage and contributions of the Black community. And while it's celebrated in February, as LeBron James once said, we celebrate Black excellence every single day. I hope all Angelenos will take time to visit culturela.org and the website of discoverla.com for a full list of Black History Month events here in Los Angeles. Thank you for joining us today. We look forward to being with you again in March. Take care, everyone.